sentence changed everything, Jungkook was never the same after that. In the middle of a quiet night, in a cold and quiet corner behind the training base, Jungkook sat by himself. The winter wind crept through a small crack in the window, piercing his bones, but that was not what made his body shiver. What made him unable to stop looking down, biting his lips, and closing his eyes hard was one sentence. One sentence from someone who has been the center of many emotions that he has kept for too long. "You've changed, and I don't know where else to look for you." It came out of Jimin's mouth. Flat, softly, without tears, but that's exactly what makes it so much more painful than screaming or crying. Because it's not anger, not an emotional outburst. It is a form of fatigue, a phrase from the heart that has been looking for a long time, but never found. For Jungkook, it was like a punch right in the chest. All this time he thought his decision to be quiet, not to appear too much in front of Jimin, to give distance, was a form of his attention. But apparently, for Jimin, it was all a sign that he was gone and not coming back. That person who used to always know when to be present, when to talk, when to hug, has now become a stranger figure too silent to touch. After hearing that sentence, something inside Jungkook cracked. It felt like losing direction. He began to question all his options from the very beginning of his military training. Since that night, the friends of one unit noticed a big change in Jungkook. He becomes more silent, more focused, but not because of discipline, but because his mind is always far from where he stands. His gaze was blank as he stared at the night sky. His voice was quiet as he answered instructions. And every time he saw the silhouette of someone who looked like Jimin from afar, his body stiffened, as if hoping that time could be repeated. The unit captain asked, "Is there a problem, Jungkook?" But he just shook his head. Because how can he explain that one sentence from someone who no longer knows where he is? Has it made you feel like you have nowhere to go? Jimin, on the other hand, is also no longer the same. It becomes more rigid. No longer show a spontaneous smile during morning exercises. No more chuckling when you hear a teammate joke. There is a clear distance between them. And everyone can feel it, even if no one dares to ask. A few weeks after, the headquarters issued a surprise order. 2 personnel were selected to carry out logistics missions to remote training sites in the mountains. 2 names appeared, Park Jimin and John Jungkook. Whether it was a coincidence or a deliberate decision by a superior who was sensitive to the frozen tension between them, no one could be sure. But the night before departure, Jimin only told Jungkook, "Maybe on that mountain, we can find answers that we can't find here." And Jungkook, in a barely audible voice, answered, "I'm not sure I can find myself there. But if you come, maybe I can try." They both know that the journey is not just about bringing supplies. It was a journey to rediscover a part of themselves lost in solitude and distance. That one sentence changed everything. But perhaps, behind the wounds he left behind, there is a chance to heal together. When the sun still shyly appeared on the eastern horizon, 2 figures in full uniform were already standing in the courtyard of the headquarters. Jimin and Jungkook, who used to be the center of attention because of their cohesiveness or star aura, are now the center of gaze because of the ice between them. No warm greetings. There was no hyung from Jungkook's mouth, nor a small smile from Jimin. Just quiet. The military car drove down the rocky and slippery road to the training site in the mountains. Along the way, they sat next to each other, but seemed to be far apart. At times, Jungkook's hands felt like they wanted to move, like they wanted to touch Jimin's arm, or just knock on the chair and say, "I'm sorry." But it never happened. And Jimin, despite staring out the window, twitched his eyelids every now and then, holding back emotions that had not yet had time to finish. Upon arrival at their destination, they were given only 1 tent and enough logistics for 2 nights. In the first night, the temperature dropped dramatically and the snow began to fall slowly. They made a bonfire, sitting with their backs to each other. No conversation. Only the sound of wood crackling on fire and white breath coming out of their mouths. But suddenly, Jimin spoke. His voice was quiet, but it was enough to make Jungkook immediately turn his head. "Why are you so far away when you are beside me?" The question is simple. But on a quiet mountain night, amid bone-chilling temperatures, those words became a rumble in Jungkook's heart. He stared at the fire in front of him for a long time, then said, "Because I'm afraid. If I get too close, I'll hurt you again." Jimin nodded. Not because he agrees, but because he understands. They sat still again, but this time the silence was different. The silence of confession. Silence is not because they are distant from each other, but because they are listening to each other in the most honest way, through silence. The second night was much colder. The wind blew harder and the cloudy sky covered the moon. Inside the cramped tent, they ended up sleeping in the same place. Jungkook stared at the roof of the tent while Jimin fell asleep with his back to him. But just before Jimin fell asleep completely, he whispered softly, "I just want you to know. I don't want you to be perfect. I just want you to stay who you are. Even if it's a mess, even if it's full of wounds." Those words made Jungkook's chest tight. In his heart, he screamed. As it turned out, what Jimin needed was not a long explanation, not a big promise, not a big change, but honesty, presence, the courage to remain, even if everything has not yet recovered. Tears dripped silently down Jungkook's cheeks that night. He couldn't answer anything, but he knew in the morning he'd start talking, with words, with action. The one who came back to try to be, or maybe it's a new version that's more aware of the meaning of a sentence. When they returned to the base, nothing had changed visibly. They are still two soldiers who have to follow strict schedules, hard training, and military rules that leave no room for drama. But between them, something shifted. They began to sit next to each other again while eating. Sometimes they steal each other's eyes. Occasionally throws a small, albeit stiff, joke. But that's enough. Because from that 0 point, everything can be rebuilt. A few weeks after the mission to the mountains, word spread that the soldiers who had completed the advanced training phase would be granted 2 days leave. For most soldiers, this is an opportunity to return home, meet family, or simply sleep comfortably in a private bed. But for Jungkook, that means one thing: looking for a second chance, not just for himself, but for both of them. Hesitantly but full of hope, he sent a short message to Jimin. "Remember the little cafe near the Han River? If you get a chance. I'll be there at 5 in the afternoon." No reply for hours. But Jungkook kept coming. He sat in the corner where the two of them had always been, a wooden bench under a warm yellow chandelier. Soft music plays in the background. The aroma of coffee fills the room. An hour passed. 2 hours. He almost gave up. However, just when it started to rain slowly, the door of the cafe opened. A figure in a gray sweater and a black hat walked in, staring around with slightly puffy eyes, as if holding back things. Jimin, he sat down without much of a word, just took a deep breath and said, "I barely came. But the part of me, the part that believed in you, said I had to come." Jungkook smiled a little, gratefully. "Thank you, because that part is still there." And for the first time in a very long time, there are no more walls. No more saved words. Only two hearts can finally hear each other calmly. Sincerely, it was raining harder outside, but inside the cafe, two hearts were recovering. Not with outbursts of emotion or big tears, but with small confessions, a quiet smile, and the belief that even if all is lost, they can still find their way home. And this time, they walked in the same direction. Together. That one sentence changed everything. Jungkook told a unit colleague one night while they were talking about the past, the sentence that made me realize loss doesn't happen when someone leaves, but when you're by her side, you're not really there. And as Jimin passed through the barracks hall that night, hearing Jungkook's words by accident, he paused for a moment, then smiled a little. Because finally, Jungkook found his way back. IT doesn't take a big hug or a concert stage to let the army know they're starting to heal. Sometimes a single word is enough to make a person stop, but also enough to get him back going in the right direction.